So, hello everyone. Welcome to our episode 25. Dare I say it? We have our anniversary this weekend, so it's going to be very exciting. We are so happy to welcome Tim Scarfe. He's our guest speaker for today, and obviously he's brilliant, and he has, as a matter of fact, his own amazing podcast and YouTube channel and all the bells and whistles, right? The machine learning street talk. But Tim, I'll let you talk about yourself and introduce yourself for our listeners and viewers.
Well, hello, listeners and viewers. I'm Tim Scarfe. I run Machine Learning Street Talk, which is a very technical AI podcast where we get lots of very cool AI researchers and philosophers and cognitive scientists, and we try and go down the rabbit hole as much as possible. So yeah, that's been going since about the beginning of COVID, and it's been intellectually awakening for me. It started off just as we were a bunch of machine learning bros, and over time we broadened our horizons, and some of the interviews in particular really left an indelible impression on me. They were intellectual cataclysms. And actually, one of those people is Waleed Sabr. Actually, he just unfortunately passed away last week. And I spoke at his memorial service. But yeah, it's been a wild journey.
You just described pretty much my thoughts on that podcast as well, because a lot of stuff that I know I learned from those conversations. So thank you so much for just starting it.
Amazing, my pleasure.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. As Annalena mentioned, we're approaching our 1 year anniversary. So, it's I think it's a little symbolic that we have you here because today we're going to be discussing the great and terrible LLMs, just like the great and terrible Wizard of Oz, and trying to see if, what that magic is all about, if there is any magic at all. And we'll just basically be talking about I think pros and cons and some of the perks of this technology, but also the pitfalls. And I think we've learned quite a bit over the last couple of years because, again, it will be 2 years soon since, one of those tools, ChatGPT, became available. So I think there are some lessons learned. And looking forward to this discussion. I think that we wanted to start with just basically as we discussed in our prep call, right? So and I really like that idea that you introduced, Tim, about AI and LLM specifically being sort of like a human mirror. And if you could elaborate on that idea a little bit, because I think this is fascinating in a way. So
Yeah, I mean, I think I have an interesting position with LLMs, which is that I simultaneously hate them and love them. And a lot of people think of them as being super intelligent or proto-super intelligent artifacts, which give us incredible leverage. And indeed, I think they do give us leverage. I think they make smart people smarter and they make dumb people dumber. And you only have to look at the enshittification of LinkedIn. And if you search for certain things on Google now, it's just a proliferation of AI generated slop. I love that term, actually. I think Dagmar Monet uses the term AI slop. That's kind of caught on a little bit. But by the same token, I use LLMs all day, every day, and they have arguably 10x'd everything I do. My entire production process with MLST is built using LLMs and multi-agent systems that I've written myself using LLMs. And so it has this polarizing effect, but they are, I think, kind of pitched as something which will raise the tide for everyone, and I don't really see that happening. And actually, even more unfortunately than that, a lot of people just don't seem to realize how much of a negative effect it's having on what they do when they post stuff on LinkedIn and when they generate content. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
And our slides just left us for some reason. Was that intentional?
Maybe they were.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway.
Yeah,
We need
I
slides.
did. Yeah, I did remove the slide because it was just an intro thing, and I think that we're not going to be lecturing anyone today with probably any slide decks or anything. It's going to be more of a fireside chat discussion. And yeah, so what was it the term, Tim, that you said? AI generated slop?
Slop. Yeah, I think
Slop,
slop
like
is a
as
kind of
yeah.
colloquial term for when you do some cooking and you
Mhm.
don't really do any preparation and you just slop a load of stuff in there.
Oh
So you
yeah.
just get this big confection, this big mess, an incoherent
I,
slop.
I think I started seeing this, the term recently on Twitter, kind of just, it rings a bell in AI context as well. It's been floating around. Briefly, let me just hijack this discussion. So I saw this news today. The Citigroup came out with this report that they expect AGI by 2029 and ASI by whatever, just shortly after. Tim, what's your take on this? 2029 AGI, should we all just work on our people skills every day now and, start
Depends.
being
Yeah, depends what you mean
ready?
by AGI.
Depends on what group means, right? Because it was very, very funny. A lot of people were commenting kind of just sarcastically. So it's nice to see people are, kind of keeping their sanity in check still. Do you think those
Yeah.
types of reports are, do they threaten kind of this common, I don't know, perception of like what LLMs are all about, what this technology is all about? Because a lot of people that I've been talking to, they're not in the space, not even close. A lot of my friends, they are scared. That's the common thread that I'm hearing. They're scared. They're like, we don't know what's that about. But I've heard whatever I've heard from the whatever sources that they're using, it's scaring them. Do those reports help?
Yeah, I mean, the AGI definition is a difficult one, and I heard that OpenAI is trying to claim that their system already is AGI just to get out of the Microsoft contract. And we see all of these very woolly definitions of AGI. Intelligence is the hardest thing in the world to define, by the way. There's some great research about this by Pei Wang, where he talks about all these different types of ways of defining intelligence, and all of them are anthropomorphic to different degrees. But OpenAI, they use this notion of whether it can do the kinds of things that a skilled worker can do. But again, with a cognitive science lens, we understand that they are a mirror and they are only as good as the people using them. Also, I think that some of this is misguided and just out of touch, because when we look at all of the advances in language models, it's all about building more constrained, specialized multi-agent systems which recognize the limitations of LLMs and actually help them scale up. So this idea that we're going to have some super intelligent autonomous thing by 2029, I mean, you could make that prediction speculatively, on the basis of some hitherto undiscovered technology. But on the basis of current large language models, that couldn't be further from the truth. That's not to say that we're not going to do amazing things. We're going to build specialized, hybrid, robust systems that do a whole bunch of things, but we need to build it, and they will be very specialized.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we need to, for every report like that, we need just kind of different report that's gonna complement that report and fact check everything and just explain to people what's not true and what's true and what's possible, and what's just fear mongering. Because I think it's very important to just keep this perspective in mind. Otherwise, we just tend to be bogged down with this apocalyptic scenarios. People love them so much. Very news grabby, but
Well, the thing is, we have to be a bit careful here, because there's a whole spectrum of risks. And, it goes all the way on one side of the spectrum. You have the science fiction, existential risk type stuff. And then when you sort of come down into the middle of the spectrum, you've got labor market disruption. That's a pretty big one. I mean, this certainly will disrupt the labor markets. And then there are some more esoteric ones we can talk about, like just how it's going to affect society and stuff like that. But I think it is important to kind of separate these different risks of the technology.
Yeah. So you're referring to this phrase, kind of the statement has been going around on social media for a while. AI won't take your job. Somebody who knows how to work with AI will, with all those tools. Do you agree with that statement?
Honestly, it's a very difficult one, because I know from practice that it's very, very difficult to scale any process, right? Because every single cognitive process which is enacted in a large corporation involves many people, and deliberately so, right? Because that's how security works. We deliberately diffuse the agency of many cognitive processes so that we can do error correction, that no one person has the power to do bad stuff. So what we do is we kind of like take a process and we spread it out between many different people. And when you start to automate different parts of that process, it's very much bottlenecked on this kind of distribution of folks that are involved in enacting the process. So even though this technology, I mean, I'll give you another example. On MLST, it's made me go 10 times faster, but that's because like I'm basically one person, right? I'm doing the job of 15 people.
You're lying right now. Like one person can't be doing everything you've been doing. Team, this is impossible. You're there's two of you. You have an evil twin or someone helping you, because the amount of great content that you guys been churning out recently is just, no. I refuse to believe it's just you.
It's not anymore. So now I have 6 full-time video editors, but it's been a very interesting process scaling from just me to 6 video editors, and it has forced me to automate a whole bunch of things. But there's always the understanding gap. That's always the problem, right? Because whenever you scale a process up, just like in that book, The Mythical Man Month, even if it's a perfectly partitionable task, it does not scale linearly with the amount of people that you hire, right? There are just all of these knowledge sharing bottlenecks. In fact, the knowledge sharing bottleneck is probably the biggest problem in every single enterprise, right? It's a big problem. And that's why you need to create this kind of interface between all of the folks, right? So that they've got some mediated interface to communicate with each other. And even though you can scale up and make things, behind the interface faster, there'll always be bottlenecked on the interface. So this idea that we're just going to have some runaway improvement in productivity is just, I think a lot of people who make this argument just haven't worked in large organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's kind of one of the main selling points of this technology, right? Any AI-powered startup, you name it, anything, you slap AI on it, and you just be like, productivity is up by 85%, 100%. You'll just be more productive. Pretty much, you won't be doing anything. You won't even have to go to your work anymore. So, and people, it kind of just gets to people, but it also scares them away. Everybody wants to be sure that they'll have their job tomorrow. And yeah, as you said, it's very important to get all the people on board. And obviously, the education part of it is very important, because obviously you can stuff your offices with the latest and state of the art tech. You can just like the best you can possibly find. But if the people are not on board, nothing will happen. It's the magic won't be there, because the people need to be aware. They need to know this tech is there, what is there for, how it can help them, how it can augment their work. Otherwise, without people, it's nothing, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets deep into the philosophy of what an organization is. I'm a big believer that things that are causally embedded in the real world, they actually have some kind of substance over algorithms, right? And there is something that is intangible about the way that companies work, and so often I think tech people just discount the value of that in so many ways. But there's definitely something there. Yeah, but it is a complex issue. As I was saying, like, I think the dynamics are very different when individual folks are using large language models, and small communities and open source are using large language models. The reason why there's inertia in large organizations is it's just really, really difficult. And that's why we need to build the next level of abstraction on top of this technology to actually make it reliable and scalable. And that is happening. And it's very exciting. But, there's always this thing that, when the stakes are high, when there are legal ramifications because this thing is making important decisions, then you need to spend a hell of a lot of money just checking the answers, and you need to start bringing more and more humans into the loop again. And then at some point, you're not saving as much money as you thought you were. So that there's always like a bit of a catch-22 with this stuff.
Yeah. It's I would say it's a bit of a deterrent for companies, right? Compliance obviously takes up a lot of time and resources, and a lot of companies, smaller companies, simply can't afford that. So they just rather not take that route or not even launch this tech anyway. So I read somewhere a few days ago. So OpenAI tested its watermarking technology, the output like a while back, and it worked perfectly. And they didn't implement it because the users they were scared, because they got the indication and the whiff of like the users will be scared to use that when it's watermarked. So they didn't want everyone else to know that whatever the output is AI generated. So OpenAI had this opportunity, but they were like, not a very good business decision. So yeah, it's interesting how things work. I mean, it's pretty much old school kind of big tech thinking, I would say.
Yeah,
it's just AI flavored.
Yesterday, Google released their own watermarking technology called SynthID.
Yes.
It's very clever. Right. And apparently they've already.
I haven't read the paper yet, but I've seen it. They released SynthID, but it was for image watermarking tech like a year ago. I wrote a post about it, but that's for text. So today obviously it's different. Yeah, everybody was kind of very, very. Did you read the technical paper? What you think about it?
Yeah, I read the first half of it. So essentially, it's something that gets plugged into the sampler. So it only happens at inference time. And you have a fixed random seed, which goes into a random number generator. And then that essentially biases the sampling algorithm. And then they have this multi-stage tournament sampling scheme. And they have to sample it in such a way that it doesn't change the perceived utility or capability of the language model. It has to be as good as it was before by human perception and benchmarks and so on. And they've managed to do that. And the selection algorithm is kind of entropy dependent. So in situations where they can make a slightly different choice or a slightly biased choice, and it wouldn't actually affect, the perception of the algorithm, then they can do that. And there's a sliding parameter on it. So obviously, if they slide the parameter all the way up, then it will start to have a destructive effect on the output. So there's a kind of Goldilocks zone where they can set this parameter at such a point where they can detect, if it's been detected by a language model. They've already been using it. And what I love about stuff like this is it just reminds us that these things are random number generators, basically. A lot of people just don't like, thinking of this LLM sampling process as being like, we randomly select from a probability distribution every single token, but that is what happens. But no, I'm very happy that they've done it, actually, because I think detecting content from AI is a very important thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, only yesterday I was speaking at this online event where we were touching upon AI and copyright and artists' rights and the latest U.S. legislation. California, for example, right? The legislators are putting a lot of effort into, just working on different ways of how to make companies take notice, and a lot of companies have. Google, and before that Adobe came out with the content authentication initiative, where online you can, just pretty much if you're a creator and you create your content online, you can just verify it, and it's going to be in the metadata, and so later on it's going to be tied back to you. So doesn't matter where your image or whatever your artwork travels afterwards, online, so it can be traced back to you. I think it's very important, and it's nice that finally this gets the the attention it deserves, apart from other things that don't. But baby steps. I don't think we have the luxury, though, considering the pace of this tech. But Alisa, you wanted to say
attribution
something.
is also very important. It'd
Yeah.
be great if the language models could attribute where the content came from.
Yeah. It would also be great if they could just tell you that they don't know something, that when they don't know, right? It would be just amazing if you ask them something, and instead of just coming up with some advice, just to like some information, just in order to please the user and just fulfill their goal, right? There has to be an answer. There has to be a response no matter what. They'll just be like, I really don't know.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be something?
yeah. I mean, I think this is a good segue, because I wanted to, I wanted to go back to the terrible aspect of the LLMs, because I know Tim hates them. So I really wanted to give them the opportunity to go full throttle, and just criticize this technology as much as we can. And I'm really, I really like your idea to discuss the Chinese room argument a little bit. I just understand on a very, very high level is just basically, and I like it. The theory is pretty much being refuted that, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that the human minds, I mean, there is a theory that human minds are computer-like, sort of like computational information processing system. And as far as I understand, Chinese room argument is trying to refute that theory. And as Elena was just saying, oh, it'd be great that LLMs did that, or maybe they didn't do that. So I think that your point, Tim, is that LLMs are not intelligent. And yeah, and it would be great if you tell us why. Like, why do you think there are not? And yeah, so
just before I answer that, I mean, I do love LLMs. I probably use LLMs more
love-hate
than
relationship.
anyone. It is insane. I use them all day, every day, but I don't think they're intelligent. I use the mental reference frame of them being a database, and that's why they always have this kind of collapsing effect, which is you give them a bunch of information and they kind of they collapse the entropy. In fact, every time you iterate autonomously, the entropy collapses, and that's part of the reason why there's this Nature paper out from DeepMind a couple of months ago by a guy called Ilya. I interviewed him the other day, and he was talking about this model collapse. This thing that when they eat their own poop, they collapse. But there are ways of stopping this from happening, right? And even if you're building a summarization system, you could build a multi-agent system that was actually doing deliberate expansion on subsequent steps. And of course, the more supervised this is, so if there's some human source of entropy, the less this model collapse problem will happen. And we're going to study this model collapse problem, and I'm sure we can fix it, or improve it over time. But yeah, they do have this kind of sclerotic effect where they kind of collapse the entropy. Right. So your question was the Chinese room argument. Now, the Chinese room argument is definitely, it's misunderstood by a lot of people online. So it was by this guy called John Searle, and he wanted to argue that strong AI is not possible because the systems will not have semantics in the way that we do. And semantics essentially is meaning. And he was making the argument against something called functionalism. And functionalism is this idea that some people think that we can create minds in a way that is divorced from the physical substrate that they exist in now, right? So functionalism says that we can design a mind based on little abstract pieces that do the same things but aren't the same thing. They're not made out of the same stuff. So John Searle was arguing that there is some unknown physical causal mechanism that happens in our brain. There's some interesting kind of dynamics of causation that happens in our brain that would not be replicated in silico in a computer. He was not saying that it's impossible in principle to recreate something like this using some other physical mechanism that we don't know about yet. So he's not saying strong AI is impossible, but he's just saying that when we understand each other right now, there is this symphony of physical causal processes that are enacted in the real world that, they start here and they emerge in our conscious experience. And he says that there is a subjective component to our conscious experience. Now, he's not a dualist. He's not saying that there's some other realm, like Cartesian dualism. He's making the argument that there's this kind of strongly emergent relationship between the low-level dynamics and what happens in our conscious mind. And because there's no obvious kind of way of traversing that pathway, we can think of it as being subjective or inaccessible. And because that inaccessible part of semantics won't be available to computers, he makes the argument that computers won't understand.
That's pretty understandable in layman's terms. I mean, that's I understood everything perfectly. No, seriously, every time I hear you speak, I feel I get smarter, Tim. Just like right now,
Thank
it's
you.
just a lot of, you are very articulate. I like that.
Well, it's only through practice, because I have to talk about it all the time. But I think it's a really beautiful idea, because it really jives with my intuitions about so many things with intelligence. And Searle was talking about semantics, but intelligence can be decomposed to all of these different factors, right? There's consciousness, there's agency, and I think that these are different sides of the same coin. And I also, I suspect that these are real things in the world that we live in the companies that we work at. There's some kind of real physical dynamics which actually add a lot of value that we are discounting. So it's kind of related to John Searle's argument in many ways. I think we just assume that we can build an abstract model of cognitive processes that happen, and we wouldn't lose anything that we have in the physical world. And I think that's a mistake.
So you think this is what you kind of named the agency erosion, or something different? Or I understand it might be like multi-factor thing, because being a human is just so many things. You can't really like block one thing and say, oh, this is what defines us as a human, and that's why we're different from the machine. So, and we talked about that. We talked about like what creativity will mean with this abundant use of LLMs. What kind of, are we talking about, destroying the fabric of reality and things like that. So that's all into the terrible bucket, right? So if you want to, if you want to elaborate on that as well.
Maybe. And I learned a lot of this from Luciano Floridi when he's got this beautiful philosophy of information. And again, interviewing him was one of those intellectual Rubicons for me. And he had this beautiful term called reontologization. And he was simply arguing that our very nature is transforming from the physical substrate to the information substrate. Just that, basically. And he said that this is happening just with all information technology. Of course, it's being accelerated with AI, but you need to have a digital identity to get a driver's license, and a lot of our laws are increasingly enacted in the virtual world, and it's creating a digital divide. Floridi talks about that it's very difficult for people in my parents' generation even to do a lot of normal things in society. So yeah, that's reontologization. The agency erosion point is very interesting, because I think that even though these systems don't have agency, they still are agency. And that's because if you imagine, I think of agency as being like a contour map. It's using the kind of the visual motif of gravity, I think, helps think about agency, right? So if you imagine like a solar system or something like that, and I guess what we would like is for us to have a high agency society where the contour map has like little bumps for individual humans, right? And what is agency, right? Agency is about self-causation and intentionality. So it just means, quite simply, that I am the cause of my own actions, and I can control the future because I can plan, right? I can think many steps into the future using my world model, and it's related to power. right? So I have influence, and I take actions, and I plan into the future, and I increase my agency by almost kind of subjugating other agents into my agential field. So it's very much like a kind of, think of it as a kind of gravity solar system type thing. So when you have lots of individual agency, that means you have all of these individuals that are following their own sort of gradient, right? They're sampling information from their local sensorium or their Umwelt, or call it whatever you want. And it seems to me quite plausible that when all of us as agents are increasingly sampling our information from monolithic centralized sources like language models, not only sampling, but it's a bidirectional process, right? So we're starting to offload our cognition to centralized processes that suffer from this model collapse problem, right? Which means they're becoming sclerotic over time. I think that is a very reasonable argument that it will erode our agency.
Because every time, when I think about agency, I just inevitably kind of think of it in a more narrow sense, kind of in the legal sense, when you're taking the bar exam and you're presented with this hypothetical about agency and what kind of authority you give to other people, when your principal is somebody's your agent, where they can perform certain actions on your behalf and have this capacity to sign contracts and things like that. So I think that discussion also has been very prominent within the AI and legal tech community. But I think that you were talking about agency in the broader sense is like, are we exercising our own will? And just, as you said, like cause and effect, kind of a chain of that actions, right? So, yeah, I don't know, people are already using, AI avatars kind of, and their digital replicas, which are sort of like extenuation of their human self. So, but I think that's one aspect of it, right? But the other thing is that how much of in control are we these days when there are certain things that are making stuff happen on our behalf, right? I think who was it just yesterday introduced? Was it Claude just basically doing like all the Google Maps research on your behalf, just doing everything for you? I think that was just introduced yesterday, or like the day before yesterday. So yeah, it's interesting. It's like how we're going to redefine what we are responsible for, and I think it's one of those kind of a dangerous things. And also, I think another thing that we were talking about is that, and again, I think that also goes back to your, kind of LLMs eating their own lunch and inevitably collapsing. Is the collapse imminent? The homogenization of things, right? And kind of that, quote unquote, impressive somewhat nature of this technology. Yeah, I don't know if you want to elaborate on this one as well, because I think it is a big topic these days as well.
Oh, definitely. And on that last point, if anything, it's the opposite of intelligence to collapse diversity. If you look at many sources of intelligence in the real world, I just dropped an episode with Michael Levin. He's a famous biologist, and he says that all intelligence is collective, right? So when you go through these successive kind of stages of model collapse, and you actually lose all of the entropy in the system, you lose the intelligence. I wanted to just quickly comment on something you said. I think that, in my opinion, free will and agency they're orthogonal to each other. Free will is usually a statement around how deterministic a system is, and I think it's possible to have a lot of agency and no free will, right? For everything that we do to be completely deterministic. For me, agency is a philosophical boundary which describes a kind of locus of causal force, right? Self-causal force. And it is related to this capability thing in the legal realm, right? Because your kind of accountability for doing something must be perceived as a form of, self-directed action, right? As opposed to being unduly influenced by other agents around you, because then you would be less responsible for your actions.
So since we're on the topic of agency, let's talk about the next big thing, AI agents. What are we to do, and how soon will AI agents take over the world. That's kind of the common sentiment that I've been hearing as well. Some people are very excited that agents will be doing everything for them. Others obviously are very, very scared that, again, they'll be doing everything and they'll just take over the world. How far out are we, Tim?
Yeah, the agents that we build will be very specialized. So I already use multi-agent systems every day to help me publish MLST, and it's extremely specialized. You can make very weak language models generalize in a specialized domain. So I can take GPT-2 small, and I can give it a chain of thought template, and I can fine tune it, and I can make it generalize up to 20 digits on multiplication. But can it do something that me as the developer of the system didn't think about? No, it can't. It doesn't have that kind of robust generalization. So we're going to build multi-agent systems, and they are going to form this kind of fabric of little guys that do specific jobs for us. And as we error correct them, they will actually lose agency even more, because they'll be even more specialized and more specialized. So that's going to happen. Are agents going to take over the world? No. Because the kind of AI we have now, it does not deal with any ambiguity whatsoever. And a lot of it comes back to this Chinese room argument, right? The reason why you have to very, very clearly specify everything that a language model does is because it didn't quite understand what you meant, right? So you have to say, no, I didn't mean that. I actually meant this. No, I meant this. No, I meant this. And you just kind of go on this traversal, right? So you go, you do all of these different things, and over time you robustify it, and you make it robust in this very specific traversal cone, and that's your agent. But that's all it's going to do. It's never going to do anything useful when it has to deal with the kind of ambiguity that we do as humans.
So do you think this like ability to like really narrow down, so agents being like a very specific kind of a computation method, or like this very narrow implementation, this is actually going to drive the adoption of such agents or LLMs more within the enterprises, when they realize that, we still can have certain control with it, and the way that our agents are interacting with the clients. For example, I was in a presentation yesterday with this, software company that deals with, provides basically support for law firms. They kind of do everything, but people were discussing this AI chatbots very enthusiastically because it's just depending how you build it or how you implement it. It could give great perks to your organization, but at the same time, and they were doing all this like analysis based on generations, like baby boomers, like Gen X, Gen Z, whatever, millennials, just to showcase how people of different generations, based on their data that they have at the moment, how they react to to the possibility of interacting with AI chatbot when they're requesting legal services and doing some kind of research, whether they need to solve some legal problem and hire a lawyer at the end. So you think that this ability to really narrow down actually will drive the adoption? It's not a limitation, right? In your eyes, or yeah.
Well, no, it's purely a perception thing, and I love Francois Chollet's take on this. So they're like a database. And when you put a prompt into them, what you're doing is you're retrieving a skill program. So when you train a language model based on the data it's trained on, it internalizes all of these little skill programs. And you put a prompt in and you retrieve one of the skill programs. Now, there are almost uncountably many skill programs. It's an incredibly flexible technology. So it's going to be used as a cognitive appendage. And we will learn how to create retrieve the skill programs to do whatever we want to do. So they're going to help you do all of these specific things around your house and at work, and you're going to say, I want you to do this, and I'm going to spin that up as an agent, and now it's going to run autonomously doing this specific thing. It's very exciting in a way, because we will build this massive collection of little skill template agents that do very, very specific things. But that's completely different to thinking about it as a general technology. It will always be completely driven by us.
That was my kind of follow-up question. You think at some point they will be AI agents they will be able to anticipate what you would like of them. Like, you haven't even thought about it, or you were gonna think about it. So just, kind of you were sort of getting there, but you were not quite sure, I don't know, in your mind. But they already know, and they just anticipating that they already just cater to that.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
they do appear clairvoyant because they are so incredibly well fine-tuned on the distribution of language, and the chatbots will get a larger context, so they're going to become better and better mirrors of us, right? And that's why your personalized chatbot will be able to complete your sentences. And there is something to be said for, we aren't as clever as we think we are. I edit my interviews on MLST, and I often say the same things, and a lot of senior scientists often say the same things, and I joke that they're in chat GPT mode. But we do have these repetitive patterns of cognition, and yes, language models would pick up on that, but that's completely different to saying that they have agency. Like a lot of mechanistic interpretability researchers, it's their job to sniff for signs of agency in these models. And what that means is they're looking for signs of intentionality and deception and consistent beliefs, and like all of these kind of forms of cognition that we have as humans. And unfortunately, it's possible to read the tea leaves, because it's impossible to distinguish the result of reasoning versus the result of memorizing reasoning. I mean, there was an interview I did with Sabaro Kambahati, and he gave the example of this Microsoft interview question. They said, "Why are manhole covers round?" And
oh yeah, I actually I had one of those interviews questions when I was getting my job 14 years ago in the software company. And
yeah,
can I answer that, please?
please go for it.
Yeah, because it's easier to roll them.
I thought it was.
Oh,
Because of the
Isn't
lids.
the answer?
The lids are really heavy. The lids are really heavy. So it's like if they were round, you would have to like carry them. But because the holes are round and the lids are round, you can just like roll them over, from one place.
well, this
I
is
just
thought,
actually
wanted
I
to
very
thought
answer.
interesting.
isn't
Because
the answer like, is it's easier to just fall down, get in there? No, just because it's round, you just no.
I think
There are no sharp edges.
I think that's the canonical answer is it can't fall down the hole, because like if you think about it, if it was triangular shaped, you'd be able to put it in a certain orientation where it'd be able to fall down the hole, whereas that can't happen with the round one. But your point though raises something very interesting, which is that if you look at a lot of intelligence tests, even Francois Chollet's ARC challenge, there are actually uncountably many correct answers. So you get to the notion of what is a correct answer, right? And this is another anthropomorphic thing, right? That we have this uncanny ability using our world knowledge and so on to say this is the most reasonable answer to this question. And if you had an AI system which really was clairvoyant and super intelligent, like how would it know that we were looking for that specific answer rather than some weird and wonderful, this is a really difficult problem.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to also touch on some of the perks of this tech, right, and some of the great aspects, right. I think we talked about the terrible and just kind of going back and forth, but and so kind of in the software development industry, I think inevitably this question come up because many people are using all kinds of different Gen AI tools to help them with whatever. So but I think you mentioned a really interesting point when we were discussing kind of during the prep talk, is that agents, yeah, they're great. I mean, it's like the whole new level of abstraction and things like that, but at the same time the system LLM cannot be familiar with like the entire stack of this like entire idea or like architecture behind it, and a human is still needed in the loop. So this is very interesting to me because I've heard about people saying, oh, it boosts productivity so much, but I guess it also depends what kind of product you're working on. So that's going back to the adoption of those things like within the company. But at the same time, it's also from what I heard some testimonies, is very siloed. So not so many companies have this process kind of organized and scaled to the way that everybody's kind of using the same tools or that are doing the same thing. It's very much like, oh, I'm going to be using this, and the other person will be doing something else. So yeah, if you could speak to that, because I know you have this massive like software development experience. Yeah.
Yeah. They in restricted cases they do dramatically improve productivity. So you could I use this program called Cursor, which lets you use let's say Sonnet 3.5 the 200k model, and you can write any code you want. You can generate 2,000 lines of code that probably work in less than 10 minutes. It's absolutely insane, right? What happens though is that you hit a wall of complexity very quickly, right? The code sort of like collapses under its own complexity because it becomes a verification problem, right? You're generating code faster than you can understand it or verify it. Now, that's just one person. Imagine what happens when you have a team of 5 people and then 500 people. And again, we're going to build tooling for this. So over the next 5 years, a lot of the innovation is going to be building new ways of doing software code review. Because right now, it's not fit for purpose. I mean, I actually built a startup called Merge, which was a code review startup a few years ago. And, if you go on GitHub and you look at the peer, like there's a PR request, right, which is where you do peer review. And you just have this massive list of files. And usually you go through and you just kind of check all the changes, and it's not structured in any way. It's not ordered in any way. I'm sure language models would be able to kind of help you focus in on the semantic differences or the important differences. But there's this huge verification problem. And also, when you have like these distributed organizations that are working on different units of functionality, it's just going to get really difficult to tell whether or not you've broken something. And there's a bunch of things we can do. We can build new types of unit tests and stuff like that. But I think that the real problem is what I call the understanding credit card, which is that a lot of software knowledge isn't in the code, right? Just like a lot of real world knowledge is not in the text with a language model, right? It's in here. A lot of information is not in the text. A lot of information is not in the code. It's mimetically shared. And I think that will form a fundamental gap and bottleneck. And we can come up with ways to improve this, but it will always be a big bottleneck.
Do you think LLM can help with testing and code reviews?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But it will always be in a very directed setting. Right. And don't get me wrong, this stuff is great, right? So using Cursor, using Gen AI code, it often makes mistakes, but the human supervisor can say, no, I actually meant this. No, I actually meant this. And you can kind of get it to line up, but there's always a bit of a gap. One thing I'm quite excited about is having a kind of transaction log in software engineering. So the software engineers, they use prompts to generate the code. And implicit in the prompts are a whole bunch of semantic assumptions about why the code was written in the first place. And I can see a future LLM that was grounded on all of those prompts that the other engineers did to generate the code. Because when you start from a blank slate, the language model will make loads of mistakes because it won't know about all the assumptions and all the reasons why bits of code were created. But by the same token, language models are very sensitive to distractors. So the more of a dense context you put into them, it opens up a new class of errors. So there's always this Goldilocks zone between like having a blank slate, which kind of gives the language model creativity, versus giving it too much of the historical information, which creates distractors. So I see it as an engineering problem. I'm very excited about this just being a new form of software engineering, and it is going to be brilliant. But we should see it for what it is, right? It's just software engineering.
Yeah, so I guess this makes sense for these closed universe LLMs, right? So basically kind of within your organization, you're not going to any of those cloud solutions. It's kind of on-prem thing that is being trained on your on that I guess on your own internal repos, whatever you're building. And that's how when you're mentioning the prompts, I think I'm just thinking out loud how you can improve this process if that's kind of the LLM that's only within your organization. So it depends on the complexity of your product. You can like craft specific prompts for certain, I don't know, like functionalities or like the features that you guys are like doing, especially I think maybe for this repetitive type of work, which doesn't require like a lot of maybe creativity or like, out of the box maybe thinking. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe LLMs are good with like inventing some non-standard solutions. But I really don't know if that's the case. When I'm thinking about those, I think about hallucinations, which we as legal professionals would definitely dislike a lot. Yeah, I mean, in the software engineering world, I don't know how excited you would be if LLM would just like cough up some weird piece of code. Yeah.
The hallucination problem, I'm sure you folks suffer with this. They are so difficult to spot. Sometimes they're so subtle. And it's the same thing in software code. They're the code runs, the unit tests pass, and you get these very subtle little problems. And especially if it was something that happened 2 weeks ago, so now it's been compounded because other engineers have started building on top of it. And it gets even harder in a way because now we're building these multi-agent systems, and you get kind of like problems that emerge several levels up, right? So when these agents interact with each other and you have these second order interactions, you get these effects. And these effects are caused by some hallucination, from some of the code. And it's very, very difficult to track down these second order effects, especially if you've got different teams that actually build these agents and test these agents. Because we are building these distributed systems, which means you might have different owners, different people maintaining the code for these different agents, and different versions of the agents running, and running on different clouds maybe. So there's going to be a new class of problems that we need to solve. But it's not to say it's unsolvable. I mean, this is how Google runs now, right? They've built highly distributed, scalable systems, and they have built checks and balances and ways of making it robust, and that's what we need to do. But it will be just the result of loads of hardcore engineering.
Yeah, and you also mentioned security, I remember, because this is something that everyone is very much concerned these days, from all the different aspects, like just LLMs actually hallucinating some of the packages that are not even there. I mean, they're totally fake. Introducing some malware and things like that. So, and because you mentioned also this multi-stakeholder kind of a process that we have in place right now for all the different systems and features and things like that. But I think that, with the introduction of this LLMs, it becomes even more complex. So, I mean, if you want to comment on that as well, because security is a big thing these days. So
it's a huge problem. Yeah. So I interviewed this wonderful research, security researcher at DeepMind the other day, and it just opened my eyes to the sheer amount of vulnerabilities that these systems have. I mean, we're talking about hallucinations. That's a drop in the ocean. When malicious actors start to control different parts of your software supply chain, you're in big trouble. I mean, there was a recent fiasco with PyTorch, for example, where someone managed to change the dependencies and malicious but look at data poisoning, right? Like a lot of these models that you download from Hugging Face, like all you need to do is take over the domain where the data is pulled down from, and there are these things called data attacks, data ordering attacks, where you can create backdoors in an ML system, and the whole point of a backdoor is to make it imperceptible, to the people who run the system. So just by changing the order of the data samples, so I'm not changing what samples you have, I'm just changing the order of them, I can create a malicious backdoor to make the machine learning model behave. I can give it a trigger and do, it will do something that I want it to do. There are architectural backdoors, so just by slightly tweaking the architecture in a way which is imperceptible to the people who run the thing. Because when you download a model of Hugging Face and you just see this big architecture in a Python file, like you've got no idea what it does because it's inscrutable. So if someone just changed a couple of things in a specific way, and it goes on and on and on. There's sponge attacks where people can do what is essentially a denial of service attack. Because these models, they don't perform the same amount of computation with respect to an input. If you like malform the input, you can actually make the GPUs blow up, right? Because you can kind of like craft an input to make the GPUs shut down and do a thermal shutdown. It goes on and on and on. Like the security landscape was already hugely problematic, but with ML, it's just like an order of magnitude worse.
Yeah. So just elaborating on that, do you think there's this big discussion about open source versus non-open source, so what open source for AI means and stuff like that. So, and there are arguments on both sides, right? So do you think for the systems to be. And again, I guess the complexity is that AI systems they're not just oops, I went dark. That AI systems are not just software, right? So there's other things in it. So how do you apply that, transparency, like whatever, like open source, um, to that? Because like how open you want to be, like how transparent you want to be. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question to ask. Because when there are many eyeballs on the software, that's good. Like you have the stewards of open source projects. I mean, we have like linuxkernel.org people, they're vetting everything and things like that. But I think that right now it becomes more complex because of the sheer. I mean, there's just so many things going on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of open source. I think that many eyes make shallow holes, as you were just alluding to. And it's also a statement about agency. Right, an open source system is a high agency system, and it simply means that the more you diffuse agency, the more you error correct for bad agents. Right, when you have concentrations of power, then they can do all sorts of things in their code that you don't know about. Right, I'm sure there are other takes on this. This isn't something I've thought a lot about, but yeah, in principle, I like open science as well. I love how Meta, for example, they're publishing all of their research. We're having an open dialogue. There's lots of people, playing with their systems, because there will be many, many very bad things about AI, but there'll also be many good actors that are countering those bad things because they have access to the technology and they can do their own work. So I kind of lean towards this high agency thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we have only a few minutes left. So I guess it would be a good time to kind of, for our concluding remarks. If you want to, we discussed a little bit of a great, a little bit of a terrible. So, but I think the fact is that we're going to be living with this tech for a while, and I think the next generation as well, people who are growing up at the moment, so that is going to be their world. So
yeah, it is going to be their world.
It's already their world. My daughter, she's gonna turn 11 in November, so she was like, I need to come up with some idea for my birthday party theme, something like that. Let me ask ChatGPT, and she was talking to it, kind of just, I want this and this, playing around with all like different themes, do this, do that, and she did the flyers for her birthday, like invitations and stuff. So it's kind of it's there already, and they know how to use it, and it's very interesting how they interact with it and what questions they ask, because they're obviously they see it in a different way. I think like we are this generation, literally we had to learn on the spot, like we've been through it all, right, from floppy disks to
I know,
VHS
punch cards and mainframe computers. That was the first computer I saw back in the 80s. I'm that old.
Every single time something new, and all the next iterations that just became better and better. My kids look at the CDs and they're like, what is this for? What does this thing represent, right? And they have no idea. And it's interesting how we remember everything on this, on this in just the whole representation of like how this technology evolved for the past few decades.
I think in a way we shouldn't underestimate ourselves, because we are very good at overcoming adversity. I mean, the cynical position, just like that social dilemma film, is that the algorithms undermine our weaknesses, right? That we're all just feckless, weak people, and we're just being being driven by all of these forces around us. And indeed, that seems to be the case. Certainly, when kids use ChatGPT, the default position, as we've said, is it kind of tends to just reduce the information. It just makes everything simple, and it makes you feel like you've understood when you haven't understood. But the smart people will learn to impose their agency and say, like, I need to ask the right question. No, give me more information, and drill in and drill in. And maybe it's an education thing. Maybe we will learn to overcome this problem and get the best out of this technology. And I really hope that happens.
I think definitely education. I am very firm believer that I think that the school districts should be developing the curriculum as we speak for, I think, as early as middle school or junior high, and definitely in high school, so that kids who are doing research, writing essays, papers, they now know how to use this tag. They know what the great and terrible aspects of it is, at least on a high level. I think as users, right? No need to like really dig deep, but this is something that absolutely needs to be introduced um, at a certain level, because I mean it's such an omni-use thing, right? So you can use it for math, you can use it for English, anything pretty much. Yeah, and I think it definitely has benefits, but it depending on what industry you will be ending up in. As a professional, I think that's where you kind of have to take it to the next level, because if when you're using those tools, you have certain professional responsibilities, certain ethics thresholds and things like that you will be grappling with. So yeah, Tim, thank you so much.
My
It was a
pleasure.
great
Thank you.
discussion. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
yeah.
Thank you so much for
And
joining us today.
My pleasure.
yeah, and yeah, we will have our next talk actually next week. So we're yeah, we were breaking the biweekly tradition, but this is because we had
Too many outstanding speakers.
so many
We have
outstanding
to
speakers that
have to have them.
it looks like yeah, we're really lucky to have such amazing people join us and just kind of educate and share their experiences. So Tim, thank you again. And thank you everyone who was watching. Any comments, questions, let us know on LinkedIn. We'll try to respond.
We had a lot of comments on YouTube.
And yes, please tune into Tim's MLST. Yeah, because you will not be disappointed. So thank you, Tim.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
See you, folks. Bye bye.